The crash of the glass leaping stag sculpture echoed like a gunshot through the Crystal Museum. Isolde Grant hit the cold granite floor, her arms shielding her 6-month belly as white lace baby clothes scattered like fallen petals. "Stay in the dirt where I left you," Silas Mercer hissed, his designer shoe inches from her face. Beside him, Sable Voss smirked, her emerald dress shimmering with cold malice. "Whose charity case are you carrying, Isolde?" Silas's voice dripped with venom. "Because it isn't mine. You found a new benefactor the second my mother threw you out into the rain, didn't you?" The memory of that storm 10 months ago, the screaming, the loss of her first child, and the screeching brakes of the car that saved her, rushed back. "You chased me into traffic," Isolde whispered. "You let your mother discard me." Silas grabbed her arm, his face flushing red. "You're a liar." He shoved her again. Isolde's heel caught, and she crashed into a display. Glass exploded. Suddenly, the air turned to ice. 2 massive men in black suits appeared, pinning Silas's arms. "Your name means nothing here," one growled. Isolde's phone buzzed on the floor. It was Rowan Blackwell. "Rowan, I'm at the museum." He pushed me. "Don't move." Rowan's voice was a lethal blade. "I'm already here." Outside, a dozen black SUVs roared to a halt. The Blackwell shadows had arrived, and the king was leading the way. The sky over Seoul had turned a bruised purple that night 10 months ago, right before the clouds broke open. Isolde remembered the feeling of the freezing rain soaking through her thin dress, turning her skin blue. She had been standing on the steps of the Mercer estate, her suitcase thrown into the mud beside her. Silas's mother had stood in the doorway, her voice colder than the storm. "My son is a Mercer," she had hissed. "He doesn't have room in his life for a mistake like you or that thing in your womb." Isolde had looked at the dark windows of the second floor, hoping Silas would come to the glass, but he never did. He let his mother push her into the dark. With no money and a phone that had died from the moisture, Isolde began to walk. Every step through the Gangnam district felt like stepping on needles. She was 3 months pregnant, dizzy with hunger, and shivering so hard her teeth rattled. As she tried to cross a wide, rain-slicked intersection, her foot slipped. She fell hard onto the asphalt. The headlights of oncoming cars looked like blurred yellow eyes through the downpour. She tried to get up, but her body gave out. She lay there, her cheek pressed against the wet road, thinking this was the end. She whispered an apology to the life growing inside her, closing her eyes as the roar of an engine grew louder. The screech of high-performance brakes cut through the sound of the rain. A massive black Mercedes slid to a halt just inches from her body. Isolde braced for an impact that never came. Instead, the heavy door opened, and a pair of polished black boots stepped into the puddles. A man knelt beside her. He didn't hesitate. He ignored the mud ruining his expensive suit as he slid a strong arm under her neck and another beneath her knees. Isolde opened her eyes slightly, catching a glimpse of a sharp, handsome face that looked as if it were carved from stone. His eyes were dark and intense, but his touch was incredibly gentle. "You're safe now," he said. His voice was deep, a calm anchor in the middle of her chaos. "The baby." Isolde gasped, clutching his lapel. "I have you," he replied firmly. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing and placed her into the heated leather interior of the car. He didn't ask who she was or why she was dying in the street. He simply barked an order to his driver to head to the private hospital. As the car sped away from the Mercer world that had discarded her, Isolde felt the warmth of his hand on her shoulder. That was the night the architect of her old life destroyed her, and the king of a new world decided to rebuild her. The heavy glass doors of the Crystal Museum didn't just open. They seemed to fly back as if retreating from a coming storm. The loud, arrogant shouting of Silas Mercer died in his throat as a wave of cold air swept through the rotunda. The sound of dozens of rhythmic, heavy footsteps clicking against the marble floor echoed like a drumbeat of war. Rowan Blackwell walked at the center of the formation. He wasn't running, but his pace was so focused and predatory that the crowd parted instantly. He wore a navy blue suit that looked black in the dim light, his tie perfectly straight, but his face was a mask of terrifying stillness. His eyes, usually calm and calculating, were now fixed on the floor where Isolde sat trembling amidst the shattered glass and ruined baby clothes. Silas tried to stand tall, though his hands were shaking as Rowan's security detail fanned out, surrounding the area in a silent, unbreakable circle. "Blackwell," Silas stammered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? This is a private matter with a former acquaintance." Rowan didn't even look at him. He walked straight to Isolde and dropped to one knee. The king of the underworld didn't care about the glass cutting into his expensive trousers. He reached out, his large, scarred hands framing Isolde's face with a tenderness that made the room go silent. "Isolde," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a hidden rage. "Look at me. Are you hurt?" I fell, Rowan. "He pushed me," she sobbed, clutching his forearm. Rowan's thumb brushed a tear from her cheek before he stood up slowly. When he turned to face Silas, the atmosphere in the museum turned to black ice. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silas took a step back, nearly tripping over the green dress of his fiancée, Sable, who had suddenly lost her smirk. "You pushed her?" Rowan asked. The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "She was trespassing. She's a nobody, Blackwell. Why do you care about a pregnant foreigner?" Silas barked, trying to regain his pride. Rowan took a single step forward, and Silas's own security guards lowered their heads, refusing to interfere. "You are mistaken," Rowan said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She is not a nobody. You are standing in the presence of my wife. And the child she is carrying is the Blackwell heir." The shock that rippled through the room was physical. Silas gaped like a fish, his face turning a sickly gray. Rowan leaned in closer, his shadow completely swallowing Silas. "You discarded a diamond because you were too blind to see its worth. Now, you have touched what belongs to me. By tomorrow morning, you will realize that was the last mistake you will ever make." Rowan turned back to Isolde, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He didn't wait for an apology or an explanation. He carried her toward the exit, his men following in a perfect lethal line, leaving Silas standing alone in the ruins of the shattered glass. Inside the quiet, dimly lit office of the Blackwell estate, the air felt heavy with the scent of old leather and cold intentions. Isolde sat on a plush velvet sofa, a warm blanket draped over her shoulders and a cup of herbal tea in her hands. Across from her, Rowan stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights of Seoul. He looked like a king preparing for a siege. The door opened silently, and Ryu Hyun stepped inside. He carried a slim, silver laptop and a thick leather folder embossed with the Blackwell crest. Ryu was more than just Rowan's right-hand man. He was the ghost who found what others buried. Without a word, he placed the folder on the mahogany desk and opened the laptop, his fingers moving with clinical precision. "The Mercer family believes they are untouchable because of their legacy," Ryu began, his voice flat and professional. "But legacies are built on paper, and paper can burn." He turned the screen toward Rowan and Isolde. "I began digging into the night of the rainstorm. I wanted to see why Silas was so desperate to discard Miss Isolde." He pulled up a series of grainy CCTV images. They weren't from the night Isolde was thrown out, but from 2 hours earlier. The images showed Silas's silver sports car speeding through a pedestrian crossing, hitting a figure in a delivery uniform, and driving away without slowing down. "The hit and run," Isolde whispered, her hand trembling. "Exactly," Ryu replied. Silas panicked. He told his mother, and she handled it. They paid a desperate warehouse worker to take the fall, promising his family a fortune that they never actually paid. But the crimes don't stop at physical violence. Ryu opened the ledger in the folder, revealing rows of red numbers and forged signatures. The Mercer tech empire is a hollow shell. They have been laundering money through offshore accounts to cover up massive losses in their R&D departments. They didn't just throw you out because of your heritage, Isolde. They threw you out because you were an architect who asked too many questions about their construction costs. You were a threat to their secrets. Rowan's eyes turned into flint as he looked at the evidence. They framed an innocent man and stole Isolde's peace to protect a dying company. "Silas isn't just a coward," Ryu added, sliding a final document across the desk. He is a criminal. According to these logs, the money meant for the framed man's legal defense was diverted to buy that emerald dress Sable Voss was wearing today. Isolde felt a cold clarity wash over her. The people who had made her feel small and worthless were nothing more than thieves in expensive suits. Rowan walked over to her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Ryu," Rowan said, never taking his eyes off his wife. "Start the liquidation. I want the Mercer name erased by dawn. And call the prosecutor. Tell him we have a gift for him." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Blackwell estate, but the warmth couldn't quite reach the chill Isolde felt in her heart. She sat in the private garden, watching Ryu lead a young woman toward her. The visitor was dressed in simple, faded clothes that stood in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding them. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a worn photograph to her chest. "Isolde, this is Hannah," Ryu said softly. "Her brother is the man currently serving time for Silas Mercer's crime." Hannah looked around the gardens with a mix of awe and bitterness. When her eyes met Isolde's, she didn't see a rich woman. She saw another person who had been broken by the same monster. "They told me my brother was a drunk driver," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. "They told me he killed that delivery man. My brother is the kindest soul I know. He only confessed because the Mercers threatened to take our family home. They said they would make sure I never found work in this city again." Isolde reached out, taking Hannah's cold hands in hers. "I know what it's like to be threatened by them," Isolde said, her voice steady and low. "They threw me out into a storm and hoped the world would forget I existed. They think people like us are disposable." Hannah held up the photograph. It showed a young man smiling brightly, holding a graduation certificate. His life is wasting away in a cell while Silas Mercer buys emerald dresses for his fiancée. My mother has fallen ill from the shame. We have nothing left. As Isolde looked at the photo, the weight of the situation shifted. Until this moment, her desire for justice had been about her own pain, her lost child, her ruined reputation, and the fear she felt at the museum. But looking at Hannah, she realized that Silas hadn't just hurt her. He had poisoned an entire family to save his own skin. "They used your brother as a shield," Isolde said, a new kind of fire lighting up in her eyes. "And they used me as a footstool. But they made a mistake. They left us alive." She looked toward the house, where she knew Rowan was already coordinating the strike against the Mercer Empire. For the first time, Isolde didn't feel like a victim waiting for her husband to protect her. She felt like a soldier. "Hannah, I promise you," Isolde said firmly, squeezing the girl's hands. "Your brother is coming home. And the man who put him there is going to learn that the people he looked down on are the ones who will pull his world apart." As Hannah began to sob with relief, Isolde looked up at the sky. Her revenge was no longer a private matter. It was a debt that had to be paid in full, not just for herself, but for every nobody Silas Mercer had ever tried to crush. The following evening, the atmosphere at the Mercer headquarters was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the heavy weight of impending doom. Chairman Mercer, a man who had spent decades building his family's tech empire, sat behind a desk made of dark oak, his face looking older than it ever had. Across from him sat Rowan Blackwell. Rowan didn't need to shout to be heard. His presence alone filled the room with the cold pressure of a winter storm. Without saying a word, Rowan slid a thick file across the desk. It contained the evidence Ryu had gathered, the photos of the hit and run, the forged documents, and the logs showing the theft of the Park family's future. Chairman Mercer looked at the first page and his hands began to shake. He knew immediately that this wasn't just a threat. It was a checkmate. "Your son is a hollow man," Rowan said, his voice as sharp as a razor. "He destroyed a family and assaulted my wife because he thought he was protected by your name. He thought the Mercer legacy was a shield. He was wrong." Rowan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the chairman's. "I am giving you 48 hours. You have two choices. You can turn your son over to the authorities and confess to the cover-up. If you do, I will allow your company to survive under a new board of directors. You will lose your pride, but your employees will keep their jobs." The chairman swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the phone. "And if I refuse? If I protect my only son?" Rowan's expression didn't change, but his tone grew even colder. If you choose Silas, I will dismantle the Mercer empire brick by brick. By Monday morning, your bank accounts will be frozen, your stock will be worthless, and I will ensure that every crime your family has ever committed is broadcast on every screen in the country. You will be in a cell right next to him, and the name Mercer will become a curse. The silence that followed was suffocating. The chairman looked at the photograph of Silas on his desk, the son he had spoiled and protected for far too long. He realized that the Blackwell shadows were already moving. He could see the black SUVs parked at the edge of his property from the window. 48 hours, Rowan repeated, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. The clock starts now. Decide if one son is worth the destruction of everything your ancestors built. Rowan walked out of the office, leaving the patriarch alone with the ticking of the clock. As Rowan stepped into the elevator, he sent a short text to Isolde. The choice is made. He just doesn't know it yet. The war was reaching its peak, and the Mercers were finally learning that no amount of gold could buy safety from the truth. The pressure on the Mercer family was no longer a private threat. It had become a public strangulation. In the high-stakes world of Soul's elite, silence was usually a sign of power, but the silence following Rowan's ultimatum felt like the air before a lightning strike. Sable Voss paced the marble floors of her penthouse, her phone buzzing incessantly with alerts. The Jade Queen, as the tabloids called her, was used to being the envy of every woman in the city. But this morning, the headlines were different. A video from the Crystal Museum had leaked, not of the art, but of Silas shoving a pregnant woman while Sable watched with a smirk. The social fallout was instant. Her emerald dress, once a symbol of her status, was now being mocked online as the shroud of the Mercer lies. By noon, 3 major fashion houses had cancelled her contracts. By 2 o'clock, her private club had revoked her membership. Sable grabbed her designer bag and rushed to the Mercer estate, hoping to find Silas and a way to spin the narrative. Instead, she found the iron gates locked. 2 of Rowan's security detail stood guard, their expressions as cold as statues. "I'm the fiancé," she screamed, clutching the bars. "Let me in." "The Mercer family is currently under restructuring," one of the men replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "And according to the chairman's latest directive, your engagement has been terminated to protect the remaining assets of the firm." Sable's face went pale. She looked down at the massive diamond on her finger, the ring that was supposed to secure her future. It felt heavy and cold, like a shackle. She realized then that she was never a partner to the Mercers. She was just an accessory they were now throwing away to stay afloat. While Sable stood frozen at the gates, Isolde was at the Blackwell headquarters, watching the monitors. She saw the girl who had mocked her mother's heritage now being ignored by the very world she worshipped. Isolde felt no joy in the destruction, only a deep sense of balance. "She's a leaf in the wind now," Rowan said, stepping behind Isolde and placing his hands on her shoulders. "Without the Mercer name to hold her up, she has nothing." "It's not just about her," Isolde said, turning to him. "It's about the truth finally being louder than their money." Rowan nodded, his gaze turning toward the city skyline. "The clock is still ticking for Silas. The father has made his choice. Now, we wait for the police to do theirs." The 48-hour clock struck 0 at exactly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Silas Mercer was not in a boardroom or a courtroom. He was hiding in the penthouse of a luxury hotel, surrounded by empty bottles and the shattered remnants of his pride. He believed his father's money would eventually buy a way out of the mess. He was wrong. The sound of the door breaching wasn't a knock, but an explosion of wood and metal. A dozen tactical officers flooded the room, their flashlights cutting through the dim air. Behind them walked the lead prosecutor, holding the warrants that Rowan Blackwell had made possible. Silas scrambled back, tripping over a designer chair. "You can't do this. Do you know who my father is?" he screamed, his voice cracking with a fear he had never known. "Your father is the man who signed your arrest warrant, Silas," the prosecutor replied coldly. "He chose the company over you." As the officers forced Silas to the ground and clicked the cold steel of handcuffs onto his wrists, a crowd of reporters waited outside. Rowan had ensured that the trial of echoes would begin in the court of public opinion before it ever reached a judge. As Silas was led out of the hotel lobby, Hundreds of camera flashes illuminated his terrified face. The image of the golden boy, being dragged away in chains, was broadcast on every digital screen in the city. The news anchors began to read from the leaked files. They spoke about the hit and run, the innocent man left to rot in prison, and the cruelty shown to a pregnant woman in a rainstorm. The public, which had once admired the Mercers, turned on them with a fury that was unstoppable. People gathered in the streets, holding signs calling for justice for the delivery driver and for Hannah's brother. Isolde watched the live feed from the safety of the Blackwell estate. She saw Silas look into the camera, his hair messy, his eyes wide with the realization that his life of luxury was over. For the first time in 10 months, the weight in her chest began to lift. She wasn't watching a powerful man fall. She was watching a predator finally being stopped. Rowan stood beside her, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. The world knows who he is now, Isolde. He can never hide behind a name again. Isolde leaned into him, her eyes fixed on the screen. The trial would be long, and the secrets of the Mercer family were still being unearthed, but the silence that had protected them for years was finally broken. The echoes of his crimes had caught up to him, and the path to a true second chance was finally clear for everyone he had hurt. The weeks following the trial were a blur of transformation. As the Mercer empire was dismantled by the courts, a new life was preparing to enter the world. Isolde spent her days in the sun-drenched nursery of the Blackwell estate, surrounded by the softest fabrics and the quiet hum of security. But the peace was shattered one evening by a sharp, sudden pain that took her breath away. "Rowan," she gasped, clutching the edge of a mahogany crib. In an instant, the man who had been calmly reviewing shipping manifests across the hall was at her side. To the world, Rowan Blackwell was a titan of iron and ice, a man who could bankrupt a dynasty with a single phone call. But as he scooped Isolde into his arms, his touch was as light as a feather. He didn't panic. He moved with a focused, protective grace. "I have you, Isolde," he whispered against her hair. "Everything is ready." The drive to the private hospital was a display of the two sides of Rowan's power. Ahead and behind their vehicle, a fleet of black SUVs cleared the path, their sirens silent but their presence undeniable. When a group of aggressive paparazzi tried to block the hospital entrance, hoping for a final photo of the Blackwell heir, Rowan's softness evaporated. He stepped out of the car first, his eyes turning into chips of dark flint. He didn't say a word, but the sheer aura of his monstrous side, the side that had hunted Silas Mercer into a prison cell, made the reporters scramble backward in terror. He cleared the way with a single look, ensuring Isolde never had to see a single camera flash. Inside the delivery room, the monster vanished again. Rowan stayed by Isolde's side for hours, his large hand anchored in hers. He wiped the sweat from her forehead and spoke in low, steady tones that kept her grounded through every wave of pain. When the first cry finally filled the room, Rowan's composure broke. The nurses placed a tiny, perfect girl into Isolde's arms. They named her Grace, a reminder of the second chance they had both been given. Rowan looked down at his daughter, his eyes shining with a vulnerability he allowed no one else to see. He touched the baby's tiny hand with a finger that had signed the downfall of many, now trembling with pure love. "She's beautiful," Isolde whispered, exhausted but glowing. "She is everything," Rowan replied. But even as he kissed Isolde's forehead, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Ryu confirmed that the final Mercer assets had been seized. Rowan looked at his sleeping daughter and then out the window at the city. He would be the gentlest father Grace could ever know, but for anyone who dared to threaten this peace, he would remain the most dangerous man they had ever met. The Blackwell legacy had officially begun. The air inside the high-security prison was thick with the smell of floor wax and cold iron. It was a world away from the luxury of the Blackwell estate or the glitter of the museums Isolde once frequented. She walked down the long, echoing corridor, her footsteps sounding firm and steady. Behind her, Ryu followed at a respectful distance, his presence a silent reminder that she was protected by the most powerful name in the city. When she reached the visitation room, she saw Silas sitting behind a thick pane of glass. He looked like a ghost of the man he once was. His designer clothes had been replaced by a rough, orange jumpsuit, and the arrogance that used to define his face had collapsed into a mess of hollow cheeks and dark circles. When he saw Isolde, his eyes flickered with a desperate, ugly hope. He reached for the phone on the wall. "Isolde," he rasped into the receiver. "You have to help me. My father. He won't take my calls. Tell Blackwell to stop. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, property. Just get me out of here." Isolde looked at him, but she didn't feel the anger she expected. Instead, she felt a profound sense of pity. "I didn't come here to talk about money, Silas. And I didn't come here to watch you beg." "Then why?" he spat, his old bitterness bubbling up. "To gloat? To show me how much better your life is now that you're with a man like him." "No," Isolde said softly, her voice calm and clear. "I came to tell you that I forgive you." Silas froze. He stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the catch. "You? What?" "I forgive you for the night you let your mother throw me into the rain. I forgive you for the child I lost because you were too cowardly to stand up for us. And I forgive you for what you did at the museum." She leaned in closer to the glass. "But don't mistake my forgiveness for a rescue. I am forgiving you so that I can leave you behind in this cell. I am letting go of the hate because I won't let you occupy a single second of my future." Silas shook his head, his hands trembling. "You can't do that. You're supposed to hate me. If you don't hate me, then I don't matter at all to you." "You don't," Isolde replied. "You are just a lesson I learned a long time ago. My daughter, Grace, will grow up never knowing your name. My husband is the man who saved me, while you are just the man who let me go." She hung up the phone. Silas began to bang on the glass, shouting her name, pleading for her to wait, but the sound was muffled and weak. Isolde turned and walked away, her head held high. As she stepped out into the fresh afternoon air, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had left Silas Mercer with the one thing worse than hatred, total insignificance. He was left utterly empty, while she walked toward a life that was finally, truly her own. The morning sun sparkled against the glass and steel of the newly finished building in the heart of the city. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, designed by Isolde herself. Above the grand entrance, bold silver letters read, "The Grant Blackwell Center." It didn't look like a typical shelter. It looked like a palace, because Isolde wanted every woman who walked through those doors to feel like royalty. A large crowd had gathered for the grand opening. There were reporters, city officials, and many women who had already signed up for the center's programs. Among them was Hannah, standing tall and smiling, her brother finally free and standing by her side. Isolde stood at the top of the marble stairs, wearing a stunning white suit that matched the radiance of her smile. In her arms, she held baby Grace, who looked out at the world with bright, curious eyes. Rowan stood just a step behind her, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. He had traded his monstrous mask for one of quiet pride. He wasn't there as the boss of an empire today. He was there as a husband supporting the woman who had turned her pain into a lighthouse for others. Isolde stepped up to the microphone. The crowd went silent. 10 months ago, I was told I was nothing, she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the plaza. I was told that my voice didn't matter and that I could be discarded like trash in the rain. But I learned that when you are pushed to the ground, you have two choices. You can stay there, or you can use that ground as a foundation to build something unbreakable. She looked down at Hannah, then at the many other faces in the crowd. This center is for every woman who has been told she is disposable. Here, we provide more than just a roof. We provide legal help, education, and the strength to stand up against those who think they are untouchable. We are not victims. We are architects of our own futures. With a steady hand, Isolde took a pair of golden shears and cut the thick silk ribbon. The crowd erupted into cheers. As the doors opened, Isolde felt a deep sense of completion. The Mercer family was a fading memory, their name replaced by the steel and spirit of the Grant Blackwell legacy. Rowan leaned in, whispering into her ear, "You did it, Isolde. You changed the world." She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the first group of women enter the building. She was no longer the girl running blindly through the storm. She was the woman who owned the rain. Her journey from the mud to the heights of the city was over, and a new, beautiful story was just beginning. That concludes the powerful journey of Isolde and Rowan, A story of how the deepest betrayals can lead to the most unbreakable foundations. From the cold rain of Gangnam to the towering heights of the Blackwell Empire, Isolde proved that she wasn't just a survivor, but an architect of justice. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We love hearing your thoughts, so let us know in the comments. Do you think Silas's father made the right choice in the end? And what did you think of Isolde's final words to Silas in that prison cell? Get ready, because this saga is far from over. The Blackwell legacy faces its greatest challenge, yet as a new shadow emerges to threaten their peace. Part 2 is dropping soon right here at Alfred Mafia Stories, and you won't want to miss a single second of the drama. Until next time, keep believing that no matter how hard the storm hits, a second chance is always waiting on the other side. See you in the next story.